on the line. Should children be raised in religion? With your host, Jimmy Snow, and featured guest, Shannon Q. Welcome to The Line.
Well, that was fun. Little last minute stuff to correct. Just want to make sure with you, Shannon, that you are streaming out, right? You were able to click go live and all that? Okay. Yeah, well, that's good.
Looks like it.
Yeah.
We did it.
We did it, everyone. We did this week what we've in theory been doing every week, but we still messed up this week. So welcome everyone to a new episode of The Line, the show where everything's made up and the points don't matter. No, I'm just kidding. That's Whose Line Is It Anyways? That's not this show. This show is a call-in show. We take different topics. So far, every Sunday, we have been taking topics related to religion. A lot of myself and another atheist host so far, and once again joining me this week, who very easily could be the host and I be the co-host, but my vanity wouldn't allow it. This week, returning once again, is my good friend Shannon Q. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Jimmy. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to these calls.
Tonight,
I'm an atheist with a child.
Absolutely. Yeah. And tonight we're going to be specifically talking about whether children should be raised in religion, though we'll be talking more about the nuances of the question than, because neither Shannon nor I have just a straight yes or no answer to this. So we'll be talking about a lot of the nuances. And it's a very exciting night because you all knew Shannon was Canadian, but tonight she is going to have reason to say the word harm like 100 times. And you will never know how Canadian Shannon is until you hear her say harm. It is wonderful. It's everything I live for, to be honest. And I will say, we've already got full lines. We're going to get into these calls quick. We want to encourage people, especially if you are a theist and you think, yes, we got to raise the kids with the fear of Jesus. I want to hear from you. So as these lines free up, call in and talk to us. That number down in the corner, 720-619-2288. Best time to call is right as another call is wrapping up. We love hearing from the people who agree with us, but despite mentioning my vanity before, I don't need it to excess. Lastly, a little announcement. This coming Thursday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, that time period that most people aren't, but I am, so that's what I'm giving you. 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. I will be joined by, on this channel, Dr. Mama Jones, and we will be doing a COVID-19 call-in show. We have an actual doctor, a physician in the house. Anybody can call in and have their questions answered about this whole COVID-19 coronavirus thing. I'm going to not say that phrase to excess because otherwise this video is going to be automatically demonetized because that's for some reason YouTube's policy on that virus right now. It's really frustrating. And also follow Shannon Q on her channel and stuff. I'm trying to remember all of the things to hit. Do the thing. Oh no, I just had my own show playing in my ear and I heard my own voice and it was terrible. Okay.
That's what my life is like, Jimmy. So I have no pity for you.
I have to edit myself. And at first I got some relief because there's a little bit of a change. I edit at double speed, but now my normal speed for watching videos and editing is double speed. So it's become too familiar. So I recently started editing at quadruple speed. And it's helping a little. It's actually, man. I can do probably 70% I can do at quadruple speed, but I don't know if I could if I didn't know, if I hadn't experienced saying the words and had some memory of them, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense.
Anyway,
I can't.
Should we just jump straight into callers? What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. There's already been people waiting, so let's do it.
Yeah. Let's make them wait longer.
A
moment of silence for no reason. Just do it. No, okay. All right, we'll do it. We'll head to Rhode Island, and we're going to talk to Alex. And for some reason, my clicker didn't click because I have two mice, two mouses, and I clicked the wrong one. Hi, Alex. How are you?
Hi, Alex.
Oh, not too bad. How's it going?
Good.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, we're here. We hear you. There is always a little delay. It's usually only a couple seconds, which is why, like in last week's show, I said Brandon's name for a good 5 seconds to cover the delay before I yelled "shut up." So I just want to make that clear, that I respect the delay long enough to hold off on my yelling "shut up." But Alex, I don't think I'm gonna have to yell at you to shut up at any point. Alex, what was your thoughts on whether or not children should be raised in religion?
So I don't think people should be raising children in their religion, regardless of how strongly they feel about the truth value of their beliefs or how they perceive it to be necessary. What we know is that there are no benefits children get from being raised in religion that don't come from, community and having, secular teachings brought onto them. And my concern with indoctrinating children into a religion is mostly an issue of informed consent, wherein the child is too young to make a thorough and thoughtful decision as to whether or not the religion that they're being taught by their parents is true and good for them to accept. And the reason that can become an issue is because you have impressionable young people who are probably trying to figure out the universe and life for themselves. They're being guided by the people who are more experienced than them, which is good, but when they are brought up in any particular religion, it warps their understanding of reality in a way that they can't account for yet because they're too young. And
right.
In some religions, it's not as much of an issue, but there are, religions where there are, rejections of medical science, and people die because their religion says you can't have that blood transfusion, you can't have that medical intervention that most people won't need, but if you happen to need that medical intervention and have to be part of that religion, then you're going to die. And if you're a 5-year-old who hasn't yet developed the capacity to understand that this is the consequence of that decision, then you should not be put in a position where that's the only decision you know to make.
Yeah, I largely agree with what you're saying here, as far as, and so we are, and just kind of giving everybody a warning here, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, we'll take a moment and talk about this, but we're gonna move pretty quick to the conflict calls, if you will. It might be the best way to refer to them as, but we were just talking about this before the show too. With children, there is a level of inherent trust. It's actually something we've evolved to do as children, where you trust your parents' guidances because you will have a better chance at survival. And so taking advantage of that state that children are in and teaching them things as fact, but not teaching them methods of getting ways to figure out if something is a fact or not is, I think, a dishonest way to raise a child. And so there. Any thoughts on that, Shannon?
So, sorry, Alex, didn't mean to step on you there. So I guess I have a nuanced view on this. I was talking about this yesterday as well. I always say that I have a 9-year-old, and I say that I teach him how to think, not what to think. So I'll ask him critical questions about anything that he believes. But when it comes to religion, it's more nuanced than just teaching what you believe. There's also cultural aspects of religious practices that it would be like you couldn't omit the child from, for example. So if your family goes to church every Sunday, once you have a child, you're not going to just stop attending church services or leave the child at home. So that's where it gets complex to me, because you would essentially be leaving them out of family cultural practices. Mm-hmm. So, like, what do you do in those instances? I think some of the right answer for me would be that include them, but if you're including them in these cultural practices, when the questions come up about the aspects of it that have to do with belief, encourage them to be critical. So I think it's more so a question of how you choose to raise your child as a critical thinker versus how you choose to raise your child, whether or not you're choosing to raise your child as someone who is just supposed to unquestioningly accept the practices and belief structures of the religion that you're in, which is why I'm really interested to talk to some theist callers as well, because I don't think it's just as cut and dry as you can just say it's bad or it's good. I think it's circumstantial. I think it all depends on the context and the individual relationship with the child, with the religion, what the religion itself is like. I guess my answer is I think it's more complex and it's difficult to cover in just 5 minutes. I would need to have like a specific circumstance. Does that make sense? Or am I just rambling? I do that sometimes.
I think it makes sense. And we're gonna be, I think our thoughts will be fleshed out more as we talk to more both people on each side of the issue here too. But I thought that made sense. Alex, you good with all that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to quickly add that there are certainly beliefs and belief systems that are more benign or less intense and harmful on somebody than others. I guess I just have the idea of remaining as impartial as possible and saying, if you're saying one religion is bad to raise a child, and you shouldn't just say, well, this other religion is a better one, and so it's okay to raise the child with this, but then this idea you can't raise them with. If we ban one, we got to ban all, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think either of us are in favor of a literal ban, like an institutionalized ban, like you're not allowed to take your children to church. But Jesus. It comes down to how you're going to raise your kid. I don't think either of us also suffer any delusions that even if we were like, you really probably shouldn't take your kid to those church meetings because of what they're learning. It's not as though parents are going to actually stop. But it would be nice if it seems like so often with a lot of when you're raised in religion like I was, there's this presentation of you chose it. And this was your personal testimony. You realized the church was true. But then the moment you start to question or you say that you aren't into it, you suffer social consequences and career consequences if you're a little older and such. And so and it's something you understand exists because you see the way people who don't accept it without question, the way people even just who are willing to question, you see how they're treated, and you internalize that and you recognize that this doesn't happen without consequences. In other words, you're being threatened in a lot of cases. And so I think the number one removal of that threat, letting people actually make that decision for themselves and giving them the skills and information to do so. Because when I, at 7 years old, was about to turn 8, and the bishop asked me if I knew Joseph Smith was a prophet and that this was the one true church on the planet, I just said yes because I was expected to. And at the time, as much as a 7-year-old could, believe that was the case, as much as I believe my parents about anything else, which at the time would have included things like Santa. For any kids who are watching, Santa's super real. I don't know why I said that, but anyway. It's the removal of that threat and that air of consequences. If it is a genuine belief, it's just this weird thing to me where people are like, we want people to believe, but we don't mind whether or not they have an honest belief. We just care if they have a professed belief. And I think that's garbage, and it's too prevalent, and it has to go.
Oh, I can agree with that.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex.
It's nice to talk to you, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you. Have a good night.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
Shannon didn't say harm in that one time.
I didn't. No, I will though. I promise.
About it. Okay.
My accent's
just want to make
drop
sure you're not
really bad now that I'm aware of it. I'm gonna say all kinds of maritime-y sounding things.
Good. I was worried that because I drew attention to it, you now wouldn't do it. And I just wanted to make sure that wasn't the case. Yeah. Okay.
I'll say harm.
Good. Harm.
I'll say harm all kinds of times.
I genuinely love it. That wasn't untrue. All right, we're going to stay in the United States, but apparently we're not going to get more specific than that. But we will talk to Holly, or is it Katie, or is your name Holly Katie?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
We can.
I hear you.
Hello? Okay. Holly's fine. I use a pseudonym whenever I'm doing anything online too. Yes, United
So do I.
States. I'm everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope you're washing your hands then, because there's other stuff everywhere right now that you should be aware
That's
of.
right.
But
Oh,
what
for
thoughts did you
sure.
want to share
I'm one
on
of those people.
children being raised
Oh, sorry.
religious?
Go ahead.
After you.
So I actually wanted to ask you about your question, since I'm a linguistics background, so I'm very nitpicky about semantics. Did you mean children being raised in religion as in, this is what you have to believe, this is true, so deal with it? Or do you mean being introduced to religion in a more academic fashion?
I am willing to engage with people on the discussion no matter what the nuance of the way they read the question was. So it might actually be harmful for me to say this specific thing is what I meant, because the question is meant to be taken broadly, except for that we specified a little when we first came in here.
May I ask why the distinction is valuable to you? Because it seems like you may have different positions on either side of that distinction. So there's a reason that's valuable
For sure.
to bring up for you. So I'm intrigued in that.
Yes, the nature of a question definitely changes my answer. So if it's a child should be brought up in religion, my short answer is no, as in just for believing it. But I know you guys are kind of short on time, so I won't elaborate that. Whereas for academically, I was raised in a less overt version of fundamental Christianity. So I understand a lot of the indoctrination mentality and how someone can stay in it so long too. And so for teaching children, I think it's really important to teach different religions in the world. I wish I had been taught, because I had textbooks from a Becca book, which is Pensacola Christian College, which was like, this is why these are false. And it's like 2 sentences and that's it. So I would definitely want to teach, these are the different religions. Here's the historical roots behind them. And also teach it in light of life course theory and Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. Because if you can understand the psychology of a person, especially with self-determination theory, understand what motivates them, but also understand the constraints of society and the time they're growing up in, maybe they would be a different person if they had been born in a different time or born in a different culture. So I think it's really important to be aware of those aspects, whether you agree or not, because then you can take a step back and look at the bigger picture and see what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's valuable for children to for anybody to be aware of religions and how they originate and how they interact with cultures through time. I think it's valuable for anybody to have a look at that, because there's such an immense amount of cultural influence. It's how you look at it, with what type of critical eye you are looking at it, and whether or not you're attempting to affirm one, and for what reasons you're attempting to affirm one, that become valuable. And when we're talking about children, it's a little bit more difficult to present it to them critically, especially if you're in one religion and you're anticipating and expecting them to believe and adhere to a specific religion. So I was raised Anglican. So in my case, I was raised to believe the Anglican version of Christian doctrines. I also loved and consumed Greek mythology. So it was very difficult for me to have conversations, and I was just I guess I was kind of born with a little bit of a different brain. So I would have conversations, with my parents and my grandparents about, why, we're believing this and this is a God, but so why do we ascribe to this? But when I look at this, I'm supposed to look at it as fictions. What's the distinction? What's the differentiation? And those were hard conversations, because there really isn't a good answer. So it all depends on how it's presented. I think as well. I think that's valuable and important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the love for Greek mythology, because I'm not sure what the call screener said, but I am very into spirituality and the moment, I don't have a succinct definition for that. I'm still in the process of defining it. But as someone who is raised religious, who is now both a nihilist and an atheist, there's also this other side that's very spiritual. But another thing, too, is that I think that, just my personal opinion, I don't consider myself to have an identity. I think there's identifying factors. But I ask myself the question, why do I need to have an identity? What is the drive for meaning? Why do we exist? Is that even a valid question? And that could be a very long conversation. So I'll just pose
Could be.
them as
It's also a little
questions,
bit too high level for most children.
Right.
That's true.
The thought I want to put on the end of this conversation here is, I think one thing that some people will now try to defend, though, based on this type of conversation is, well, at least if you send them with religion, they get the other thing, which is the awareness of other religions. And it's not so simple and dry as that, because I went to school, certainly as a child, believing I was aware of other religions, but I also was taught to be hostile to them. So I remember as early as first grade, asking a teacher I think his name was Joseph, and he was Hindu, and we wanted to sit next to each other because we wanted it to be easier to argue about whose religion was true. Not that we even knew what we would need to have those arguments, but we were already having those things. And so I remember being crappy to Jehovah's Witnesses and people of other religions. And then I remember when people were crappy to me because they were unaware of my religion and practice, but were generally aware of the religion, how it felt like so out of the blue and just hurt in a way that I felt violated, but I didn't mind violating other people in that same regard. So there was an instance when I was in like 6th grade where I mentioned that I believe that God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost were 3 separate beings, not the same person, and literally had a classroom full of kids in Louisiana laugh at me. The whole classroom laugh audibly in like a way that humiliates a child. And so, yeah, it isn't. There will be some people who will be like, well, then there's a redeeming quality of raising them in religion, because they will get that thing that you're saying is a good thing, and it's actually not a given. So that would be my one note on this.
Yeah,
cool,
for sure.
Cool, Holly, Katie. I'm going to call you both. I'm taking all 4 syllables with you. Holly,
okay.
Katie, does that all work for you?
Could I say one quick thing before we go? Complete tangent,
Sure.
but just like here's a note real quick. I know you're really busy, but I would love to talk to you about the bite model, because I actually disagree.
Yeah, email me.
So
that's fine.
I know it's completely different tangent, but okay. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
shoot me
you
an
for
email.
talking.
Have a good one.
Bye, Holly, Katie.
You too.
Bye, Holly, Katie.
Bye,
all
Shannon
4
Q and Rock
syllables.
Dog.
Wait, what did she call me? Was it Rock God?
Oh, I don't know. I
heard
couldn't hear. I didn't hear that.
Q and- Yeah, I missed that very last bit. So just to give people a little bit of a heads up, so nobody's sort of blindsided here, to kind of balance things out, what I've done is we are splitting the lines. Half of the lines will be for atheist callers, half for theist callers. So please don't be offended if you call in and the call screener says, sorry, we've had enough atheists. But if you, I just think that's funny to say. But if we're talking to an atheist caller and the call concludes, we will take another atheist caller at that point, presuming that there is time, because at a certain point, we'll also cut down the number of open lines total. But basically, it's I don't want to do a call and show where everyone just agrees with me the whole day. But we do have, it looks like, we're taking the calls still in order. So we're going to talk to Leah in New York. Leah, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. Leah, what did you want to present in regards to the question?
So my opinion is that religion kind of creates anxiety when raising a child in that you constantly feel like you're being judged.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a
my
person who
parents-
suffers anxiety myself, and had suffered anxiety as a kid, and it definitely was not useful or helpful as a kid for my anxiety. But go ahead. It sounded like you wanted to finish up that thought.
My parents, they're they're pretty religious Jews. They didn't like indoctrinate me so hard, but like knowing the religion, you kind of like know the basics of like, oh, heaven and hell and stuff like that. So even though they never like pushed like, oh, God is judging me, I kind of always felt like it. And even after leaving the religion and coming out as an atheist, I still feel like the sense of judgment from I don't know where and I don't know what to do with it.
Sure. And I lost a piece of that call for a moment. I don't know if anyone else glitched out there, but I lost just a little bit. Yeah, I certainly would agree that there are specific aspects of religion that cause that feeling of judgment and those feelings of anxiety to spike. And I think those things are harmful. Did you want to share any thoughts, Shannon?
Yeah, I actually have lots of thoughts on that. I think it all depends.
No, I'm kidding.
I have two thoughts about harm.
You got two of them.
So I'll start with one, and then we'll go from there. So one of the things that I want to say about this is that when you're raised from a young age, especially, or taught in general, to have a sort of existential anxiety as incorporated into your sense of approaching the world, when you remove what ostensibly was supposed to be the cause of that anxiety, it doesn't change the way that you've built your neural pathways and how your behavioral manifestations are in accordance to that sort of avoidance of harm. So it makes sense to me that anxiety would still be something that you live with to this day, because just because you changed your belief structures doesn't mean that you changed the structure of your brain. It's still wired essentially in some of the same way. So you can look up some things like cognitive behavioral therapy. You can go to Freedom from Religion and the Secular Therapy Project, and they have some coping strategies that may assist you. But just know that is something that makes a great deal of sense when you're essentially trained to have existential anxiety all the time, and it's something that you live with as a reality, and you mold your behavior around that as a reality for you. It's not just going to go away overnight because you don't believe in what is its source, air quotes, source anymore. Does that make some sense to you?
Yeah, that actually makes so much sense. Thank you so much. And also, ever since I kind of left the religion, came out, I also rebelled against it pretty hard. My parents, they're very accepting of it, but they're kind of getting annoyed of it. So I kind of don't, because it's just who I am. And I'm a little bit more open now with my views, and by little I mean a lot. So I don't know how to I know there's a place and a time, but if I see something that's, I feel like let's say in public school, if I see something that's favoring towards not completely separating church and state, I'll say something, and then people will kind of say, why don't you just leave people alone, even though it's kind of going against separation.
Sounds like you're going to be an activist, yeah?
Yeah. It's definitely hard to, especially when you first come out and you're trying to adjust sort of when you're very religious, the casual bringing up of your beliefs seems so appropriate in so many situations. But when you're non-religious, those same situations, people do not like it when you do it. And suddenly, when it was appropriate to bring up your beliefs, you get a hostile response. And so adjusting and calibrating to that is definitely a difficult challenge.
You go from a reality where talking about your beliefs is seen as a virtue to a reality where talking about your beliefs is seen as a character flaw.
Yeah. Yeah,
or
exactly.
or an attack. Even though they're still your beliefs, still the same circumstances. But if you don't believe in a god of some sort or subscribe to a religion of some sort, it's no longer virtuous to espouse beliefs. It suddenly automatically becomes critical, and it's not a virtue anymore. It's a detriment, and you should probably just shut up. It's a weird juxtaposition, eh? This whole stuff's okay. Yeah, I know. I'm super Canadian today.
She's so Canadian. I aspire to be that Canadian one day.
You'll never accomplish it.
Leah, thank you so much for calling.
Thank you. And Jimmy, I kind of just want to tell you that your videos kind of helped me transition out of religion, and I want to thank you so much for that.
I'm glad. You should definitely check out Shannon Q's channel too. It's way better.
I definitely will. She seems like an amazing person.
Thank you. Have a good one.
I feel bad for being so overtly narcissistic there for a moment. I'll tell that back.
All right, we are about to get on to our first theist caller. Before we do, because now I have you all hook, line, and sinker. A few things to remind you. One, if you're watching this over on the Mr. Atheist channel, in April, we're not going to stream to there anymore. So you need to be subscribed to the line. If you go to the description right now, there is a link, and I'm sure that the people who are over there modding will share it with you all. There is a link down in the description. It is way better for us if you watch this on the line's channel. Right now, we're simultaneously streaming this. If you're watching over on Shannon Q's channel, you can stay there. You don't need to leave Shannon Q's channel. But if you're watching on Mr. Atheist, leave that for the line, or even Shannon Q's channel would be fine to leave it. But Mr. Atheist, it's just sort of being used as a conduit to make sure you're aware of other places. Also, these shows, more so than any of the other shows I do, most of the other shows I do take time. This one, we have an actual producer, and we're using a call-in system that costs money. So if you want to support the show, because every show does cost me money, super chatting is the simplest and easiest way to do so right now over on the line. Not on Mr. Atheist. Go to the line and super chat there. That's the best way to support the show. There
really
will be other support.
Instruction.
I know, very much so. More support stuff will be coming soon. Yeah. Well, one of the funny things is, I know I told you about this, Shannon. We were going to launch a Patreon, and I actually thought we were going to launch it this month, but that Patreon was specifically going to be for. We wanted to not touch it for production. We were hoping to cover production costs with just super chats and AdSense, and we wanted to use the Patreon, to literally make it like, hey, we want to have guests in the studio I'm not even at right now. We want to bring guests to the studio to do the show in the studio as much as possible. And so the Patreon was just going to be for that. But with what's going on right now and traveling, I am an immunocompromised person. We're delaying that. We're going to delay the launch of that Patreon and the launch of flying people here, because I have grown accustomed to living and apparently wish to continue. I know it's kind of a what do I want to say there? It's so a twist selfish in my story. Selfish too. But I just didn't see that coming. Selfish. So over on the line, if you want to support the show and help the show stay existent, alive and stuff, and at least break even, feel free to super chat. Okay, so that's that little ad break out of the way. We are going to speak to our first theist caller, and we are talking to Samantha in British Columbia. I was going to say in British Canada, because it just said BC. I was going to say in British Canada, which is, if I move to Canada, that's wherever I would be. I'm pretty British. Samantha, can you hear us? Samantha? Oh. Samantha, unmute the phone.
We need you.
Our first theist caller. What if this is divine intervention? Samantha from British Columbia, can you hear us okay? Just want to make sure with Yeah, I hear you.
Yay!
Okay, it didn't beep before and then it beeped, so maybe.
Oh,
maybe
weird.
that has something to do with it.
It could have. There could have been a delay from when I told it to pick you up to when you actually we're able to talk. I don't know how this system works, but anyway, what are your thoughts on whether or not children should be raised in religion?
I think, number one, as long as it's not a cult religion, which I think is completely different than other religions, is one thing that's kind of important. And second of all, I also think as long as you're teaching your kids to be critical thinkers, and you're also teaching your kids about other religions as well, and at the end of the day, if they ever do decide to change their mind, you're very respectful and you're okay with that and letting them be their own person, I don't think there's a problem with, taking them to church if that's what you do or whatever you do, and teaching them about what you believe and all of that kind of stuff, even as early as, as they're born or whatever, because
Sure.
that's what you do in your family. Like, I think the problem is a lot of people don't teach their kids to be critical thinkers, and they don't teach their kids about other things out there. They just are so, oh no, this is what we believe and you have to focus on this only.
So let me ask you this, Samantha. So since you yourself are a theist, and this is mostly as a clarifying question, but also to kind of get to the root of what we're talking about, where religion in raising children can be harmful, would you, with your own child, or even just under this model, actually, it doesn't have to be your own child, but under your model of, yes, it's okay with these things in mind, would you find it acceptable or unacceptable for a parent to teach their child about hell and try to control that child's behavior, or encourage them to behave a certain way to avoid going to hell?
I think that's unacceptable.
Okay. Well, so I think even though you're a theist caller, I don't think we have much difference here. Do you want to tell us what version of theism you ascribe to?
Christianity.
And so what would you teach your children about Jesus Christ? Or in this model, what would you teach them about Jesus?
Who he was. He was a socialist who believed in helping the poor and looking at all the people who basically society looked down upon.
Would you teach them that the crucifixion story is something that happened in history?
I would teach them that that's what I believe as a Christian.
So, because for me, it's an interesting thing. First of all, we know that children are going to be more inclined to believe whatever their parents believe, especially the younger they are, even if only in an exercise of satisfying them and the validation you get from doing so. And so when you talk about even something like this, like I get what you said at the beginning with, no with the cult-like ones. But then the question becomes, where do we start describing where that line of a cult is and isn't? But then outside of that, if we're not talking about the cult level, if we're just talking about, I want to literally teach my children that there is this universal force in that the universe is driven by this force that sets the rules, and one of the rules it set was that so everybody could be forgiven of something that this entity allows to occur, this horrendous show of human sacrifice had to happen. Like if everyone didn't know the Christ story, if everyone wasn't aware of it and it hadn't become, for some reason, a normal part, if someone was just telling you that for the first time, it's an obscene and super offensive story. And so I guess that's part of my question here is, what is better about teaching kids as a parent that, like, I believe Jesus Christ came to this earth and then we brutally murdered him, so now that we can satisfy the rules of somebody who wants to forgive us and sacrifice between himself and actually forgiving you. Do you see where, like, for me, I think that's still an overextension of what's appropriate and what is an obscene and easily used in a poor way to try and control kids' behavior?
I don't necessarily want to control my kids' behavior based upon something like that. I would want to use more, I guess, secular approaches when it comes to stuff like that. But I can see where you're trying to come from with that. I'm trying to word myself well here. I don't want to deny any questions to my kids. If my kids ask questions, I want to be very open and answer almost any question that they ask me, whether about science, religion, any of that kind of stuff. I don't want to keep my kids in the dark about almost anything, even if it's something that could be like semi-scary to a kid. But I mean, I do think there's a level of
quick, Samantha. That's not what I really mean here, and I can break it down a little easier, actually. Let me start asking you this question. To an 8-year-old child, what is more likely to convince an 8-year-old child something is true? Because their parents believe it, or because it's a demonstrated fact using science and the methods we use for testing reality?
Probably your parents, because they probably might not understand science yet.
Right. So how would you account for that and try to make sure that regardless of whether or not you're talking about realities that are scary, and I'm not saying there's never a time and a place to teach children about what people believe about, certainly my children would eventually hear the story too, but how would you account for the fact that you believing in it is going to be a force in your child's mind against them believing in it for good reasons? Even if you believe in it for good reasons, how will you account for that difference?
I don't think I'm really understanding the question.
Sure. I'll try and restate it again. So you've acknowledged that
I'm autistic,
they are much...
so I don't know if that's having something to do with it. So.
Yeah, no worries. I'll try and restate. It's I hope you're not thinking I'm trying to fight or anything. I just want to know your answer here. You've acknowledged that a child is much more likely to believe something if their parent believes it, right? So we're still on the same page there. That force is much stronger than any other, especially for an 18-year-old child. So how do you account for that and make sure that if your children are going to come to the same beliefs, that they're believing it for good reasons and not simply to line up and appease you as a parent? Does that make more sense?
Maybe make sure that they understand about other religions or lack thereof, and make sure they understand, that I'm always going to love them regardless if they believe what I believe or not, because that's something that's also important to me, that they believe whatever they want to believe at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So Shannon, I've been being serious. So this is something that I think about quite often also, because I have a small child, right? I mean, and I believe that there is no God. Obviously, I'm an atheist. Previously, I'm a deconverted atheist. I was once a Christian, like I said. So what's complex for me as a mom is finding the distinction between teaching him why I believe what I do and not encouraging him to just believe what I believe. Because I know that just by virtue of being his mom, I wield a great deal of influence just, implicitly, that I have to actively act against in order to encourage him to be a critical thinker. So by the same token, so I'm teaching him what I believe without teaching him what he should believe. And that's a hard road to travel, because when you're in a religion, there's a culture built around it. There's practices. There's there's holidays, there's all of these things wrapped around the belief system that serve to reinforce it culturally, as well as via the influence of family members. So it's difficult to counteract because your loved ones all believe it. You're exposed to it from an early age. You're surrounded by a culture and a community that believe the same things, likely. So what I consistently ask, not necessarily me as an atheist, but as a, Indians, you are. So how do I get in front of that and encourage him to come to decisions for his own reasons? And the answer for me is something like what you said, like say, listen, whatever you believe, I love you anyway, so long as, you're not harming anybody, and so long as you and I can talk through how you got there. So would you say that you take a similar sort of approach where there's no expectation that you believe like me? Like, this is why I believe. What do you think about it? I get him to ask me questions like, what do you think about it? And if he gives an answer, like, 'cause my kid, if you'll ask him, he'll tell you, he probably thinks that there's a God. He doesn't know a great deal about Christianity because he's 9, who really did it. But he doesn't know a great deal about Christianity, like when it comes to the minutiae and the specifics. I answer questions for him if he has them, but whatever he says, I say, okay, why do you think that, buddy? Like, for what reason did you come to that decision? And a lot of the times it's because he heard it, and sometimes it's because he really thought it through. And those are interesting dialogues, and I let him explore that. Like, would you do something similar with your kids and allow them to explore the reasons why they come to conclusions, and accept that if you're the reason they come to the conclusion, that they should be encouraged to explore past that and really question why that is?
Yeah, that's a great way to explain it. Sometimes I have so many thoughts in my brain. I'm like, how do I explain this?
Yeah, no, I know what that's like. I ramble.
Me too.
I only ever have one thought, and it's never even a complete one.
That's true. Jimmy's telling the truth.
Well, good, Samantha. It sounds like we got to a place where everybody gets what everybody means here. Is there anything you wanted to put on here as a final note before we head to the next caller?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I'm good. I'm glad that I got to come on and say what I wanted to say, and I'm happy to be a Patreon supporter of you, Mr. Atheist.
Woo! Thank you so much. I'm happy you're there too. Thank you, Samantha.
Thanks, Samantha.
Yeah.
Bye. All right. So something that I see the live chat bringing up a lot is this concept of, well, what is a cult and everything else. I most like the BITE model. I'm aware of the other models that have been used traditionally in its academic sense. The BITE model is well on its way to being academically recognized, but it's actually still in the late phases, but hasn't quite met that threshold. However, as somebody who is deeply intimate with this topic, I have found that I find the BITE model to be the most comprehensive and the most useful. So if we're talking about using the BITE model to evaluate, a lot of people go, well, you can make this organization hits it, this organization hits it. How and to what degree something hits the BITE model does matter. So that's why when Telltale and I go through it, we talk about, and this was Telltale's invention, the Fibonacci sequence, using that, how there's exponential growth, and using a type of scorecard that frankly is subjective. You can get in the area, but from day to day, you might change the exact number you would give it. So it does matter not just that things hit all these points, but how significantly they do. So there will be some things that are cults because they hit all of the points maxed out. There will be some that are cults that only hit 20% of the points, but they hit those ones so hard that you're talking about such a severe level of behavior, information, thought, and education control that they would qualify too. And so where that exact line is between what's a religion and what's a cult, you can certainly say most religions have some cult-like things in them. But I do think there is a distinction despite the fact that it can be so hard to find where that exact line is. And in fact, there probably isn't an exact line. So I just wanted to clarify that before we jump on to the next caller here. I thought it was a useful distinction to make. And then right before we jump on to this next caller, a reminder to help us pay for the show and send in your super chats over on the line super chat. Or Shannon Q's channel. Also give her money. That's fine too. Just don't do it on Mr. Atheist. I don't know what to do about that. Sorry, my producer's talking into my ear right now. So just stop recording and see if it'll let you start recording again. Make sure your recording location is also on the SSD, not on your main hard drive. All right, and mute your mic, please. We are going to head to Christy. Can you hear us okay?
Yep, I sure can.
Good. What did you want to share on this question of should children be raised in religion?
I think that children should not be raised in religion because it forces something onto a child that they don't have the moral capacity to think whether if it's right or wrong. They're just taught to believe in it because their family believes in it.
Yeah, you could say though, if that's the basis of your thinking, and again, this isn't an argument, it's just meant to make you think a little more. If it's simply we shouldn't raise children with this because they can't evaluate if it's right or wrong, you can actually apply that to a lot of things that are right, but you're saying because that thing is wrong, which I agree religion is wrong, we shouldn't because the child can't evaluate it for itself. But what that sort of disregards are the obviously millions of parents who believe that religion is right. So if we're simply saying if something is wrong, we shouldn't raise children in it because they can't evaluate if it's right or wrong, that's too difficult of a mark to hit on the metaphorical dartboard, and so we have to talk about things outside of why it's a good idea or a bad idea. And I think in the case of what you're talking about, I think the strongest argument is essentially that why would a parent want their child to hold their beliefs for anything but completely authentic reasons? In fact, even when we talk about like Pascal's wager, why would God let somebody in who hedged their bets by lying that they believed? What is more important, professing that that the child says they have the same belief as you, or being able to say they came to that honest conclusion? We're encouraged to be independent-minded. We're encouraged to be skeptical. We're encouraged to ask all the questions they want, and they still came to that conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Sorry
Cool.
if it's hard for me to wrap my head around things, by the way.
No.
I am not the sharpest tool in the shed.
No, don't self-deprecate. Absolutely, don't do that.
Yeah.
These are all valid things
brand.
to bring up. Yeah, that's right.
Totally. Totally.
These are valid things to bring up because there's clear instances where you can demonstrate there is harm. The issue is that there's minutia, right? And you made a point that actually is, it's a strong point. It encourages people to develop sort of an identity that's surrounded in their belief system and ground them in a community and get potentially an us versus them mentality, which can be dangerous, damaging, and close them off, depending on the degree to which they're indoctrinated, from receiving outside information or even accepting the validity of people who exist outside the paradigm that they've been presented. Those are all valid things to bring up. The issue is when we're talking about it so broadly, without, the individual minutia, you can't make a prescription and say yes, it is damaging for this reason, because somebody's always going to be able to come up with a counterexample. Well, in this instance, that reason isn't present. So what's most important to me is trying to figure out how best to raise children, I guess, in any belief system. Like, what is the approach to figuring out how to best teach children what determinations they should be making with adopting any belief structure? How do you imbue them with critical, analytical, introspective skills and divorce them from having the fear of rejection that comes with not believing the same things as your in-group, your parents, your siblings, your grandparents, your wider community? Those are the more important questions, I think. But don't self-deprecate. Your question was absolutely valid.
Thank you. Also,
Thank you, Christy. Go ahead.
You're welcome. I am a huge fan. I've been subscribed to your channel for about 2 years now.
Wow, you're one of the early ones. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Have a good one, Christy.
You too.
Have a great day.
I think like this week's episode is a good example of, because I think so many people when they're evaluating what kind of show this would be, or just in general trying to think about like internet atheists answering questions, of course we're going to rage against the machine. And I think it's been important to sort of show the nuance that it isn't a clear yes or no, and that we're not just going to simply say like, sure, this religion has done this bad thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean all religions will. What we need to get to are whatever the core things are that are more likely to lead to damage, more likely to lead to harm. And that was my attempt. I was trying. That are more likely to lead those directions, and attack the things at the core, at the root, and avoid those things, as opposed to because like I there's too much that's subjective, and that if we make determinations on subjective grounds, our opinion is only as good as those people who agree with our subjective ideas. All right, we're going to talk to a polytheist in Michigan called Lloyd. Lloyd, what do you got for us?
Hi. Okay, so, well, I've never been on a call-in show before. But,
Welcome.
Yeah. I have a very strong opinion about this, because I heard you talking about a lot about how you were talking about how, you know, there should be a lot of nuance, how there were some nuances and stuff. And I'm just going to say, I actually strongly believe that you shouldn't enforce any kind of religion on a kid at all. Like, I'm very strongly against it, because I was raised as in a very fundamental Christian household, and it was very much forced on me. And it wasn't to like, you know, it was just like the way that it was taught to me in church was worse than the way that it was taught to me by my parents. So I would say that you were saying earlier with a different caller, they were saying, well, you know, like, Shannon was saying that, like, if you don't want to, like, exclude them from cultural things like church and stuff. And in my opinion, I just think that church is honestly just a toxic thing, especially if it's like a really, really fundamentalist kind of church, because the church I went to, the way I was taught this stuff, I internalized it so much to the point of, like, I was like convinced into believing it was basically, I believed it because I was afraid I would go to hell if I didn't, basically. And as a kid being forced into believing that kind of thing, it caused me so much anxiety, and, like, I can't even explain how, like, it led me into this just basically a hellish sort of mindset my whole childhood, because like my entire childhood, I was like, I'm just saying, like, I was so deeply impacted by this that I think a lot of people fail. Like, a lot of people are saying, like, oh, you know, you can like, there's something like, you know, as long as the religion is this or that, you know, it's fine. But I would like to just offer the idea that small things can be more harmful than you might think. Like, like simply going to church, or even the fact that, like someone mentioned before, that your parents believe something can actually do a lot more damage than people realize. To even say to a kid, this is true for sure. Yeah, you sound like you have something to say.
Yeah, I do. I have a bunch of things. Sorry, Jimmy, I'm going to step on you. So, because there's a myriad of things that I'd like to address, because I think actually we might agree more than we disagree by like miles. I think. Yeah. So so if I somehow communicated that I think it's unilaterally a good idea or beneficial, that's not what I was attempting to communicate. What I was trying to communicate was that was that it definitely can be damaging, and in many instances it is damaging, but it's circumstantial.
Yeah.
And with your circumstances, it's clearly demonstrable that it was, but it's important to address the specific circumstances without making just vast general assumptions. You mentioned what I brought up about attending churches, and it's not so much that, and I'll elaborate on the point a little bit, because obviously I didn't communicate it well initially. My point was, when you have a child, you don't suspend your belief system and stop participating in a culture simply because you have that child. So you're still going to go attend church yourself.
I get that part.
Even if you are cognizant of the fact that you want to allow the child to make their own choices, you're not going to participate in this cultural aspect and the social aspect of your belief system and omit the child, because that in and of itself would be a form of abuse, because you would be segregating them from their family. So it's more complex than just saying, okay, they can make their own decisions, because there's aspects of how you behave in a culture when you have a religious belief system that you can't just, wash away just because you have a child. But I think the most important thing that I want to hammer home, which is I think what you initially brought up, is that what is damaging is the imposition of a belief system on another human being, specifically a child, because there's such a vulnerability and high degree of trust and reliance there. Yeah, so the imposition of a belief structure on a child, like donning them with a belief system and essentially imposing it upon them, is damaging, because they aren't, you're not allowing them the opportunity to even explore why. And when questions are raised, as they clearly were with you, the imposition overrides their best interest in a lot of instances. So them believing the thing you tell them to believe becomes more important than the effect it's having on them. And that sends them a lot of bad messages about whether or not they can trust you, whether they can trust themselves, whether they can trust this God they're supposed to believe in, whether they can trust their community, whether they can trust anything. And that is damaging. So the question to me becomes, if you are in a religion or in no religion at all, how do you best lead a child toward making good decisions that belong to them and not you? How do you traverse that accurately? So hopefully I helped to articulate that a little bit better, because I feel like maybe I communicate some things as well initially as I maybe could have, and I don't want you to think that.
No, I understand what you think, and I completely understand what you think, and I don't want you to think that I thought that you saw something different. Okay. I mean, I understand your opinion, but what I mean to say is, even though you may not intend to force something onto your child or impose any belief system on them, the problem is when it comes to specifically something like church, where there's a community aspect, is you can't guarantee that someone else isn't going to do that. Like, if you're putting your kid into a Sunday school class, and even though you're not going to impose it on them, you can't guarantee that the teacher isn't going to do that, because the teacher most likely will. And that's what happened to me. Is my parents didn't really impose on me as much as my Sunday school teachers did. And there were some times when I went to church, and it was just like the things that I was taught sometimes were contradictory, and sometimes different people would have different opinions. But when you're a kid getting taught all this stuff, you don't exactly have the skills to evaluate what is true and what isn't. And so all this information is coming at you, and you just take it all in, and you just absorb all of it. And it can be a lot for a little kid. So, with that, the only thing with the church thing, with the point I'm trying to make, is that when there's a bunch of adults trying to impose one thing on impose similar things on a child, all these adults are trying to impose something on one child, and even though you might not be trying to impose it on, there might be another adult in the church who might be doing that and not think that it's wrong.
That's what a parent should step in.
That was just the point.
Find out what's going on.
That was just a point I wanted to make.
Bringing back in some nuance here too, and the initial point I was going to make after the first bit was similar to what Shannon said, because you had mentioned that you guys say there's nuance, but this, and then you kept using the word force, and I'm positive in our nuance we weren't advocating for force in any way, forcing it on or enforcing it in any way.
I know you weren't. I know.
Okay.
I'm just saying that, you can talk.
Regarding the Sunday school issue and the parent issue and your kid being intercepted, that actually comes down to the responsibility of the parent also in a much more significant and universal way, because this is by no means isolated to what happens in Sunday school. Now, as a religious person or non-religious person, that was going to be weird, like the time I said for nearly atheist content. But as a non-religious person, I do think it is more likely to happen in a Sunday school. But I had a grandpa who, when my parents weren't around, was teaching me kooky, ridiculous things, and he ended up being one of the better of my family members. But he was teaching me, he believed in hollow Earth and that you could head toward Antarctica, and at a certain point you'd actually be inside the Earth, and what you thought was the sun was actually the core of the Earth. And there is giants with flying trains, and that was something that
he sounds fun.
He was the best actually, but I was like 9 or 10 believing that this was a thing, because my grandpa, who was in a position of authority over me, told me this was a thing. He also loved the National Enquirer and believed a lot of that stuff too. But then even beyond that, school teachers will intercept. There are teachers who way overstep the bounds of what they should do, even when they're in the right. Like, there are times where I will hear stories about some teacher who basically went off on a class filled with kids with mostly conservative parents, telling them why, their parents should be trying to vote Bernie Sanders. And I think that's a huge overreach, despite the fact that I agree with the teacher. And so as far as that specific thing goes, we have to worry that this will happen, therefore we shouldn't do it at all. That's where the nuance is. It's not that that's the reason we shouldn't do it at all, because otherwise then we shouldn't have public schooling and I shouldn't have been allowed to hang out with my grandpa. It's that we should have other things in place, and we should be teaching kids critical thinking skills. And the first thing we should be teaching them is, just because somebody in a position of authority says it doesn't mean it's true. And instead, I was raised with the never contradict your mom, never contradict your dad, never contradict your grandparents, and contradiction includes asking them if something is true. Like, that was something I was actually raised with. And so that's
good,
that's where I think I for sure am saying, and perhaps Shannon would agree, that's where the nuance comes in, not whether or not we believe it's okay to force religion on a kid.
No, I definitely agree with that. Actually, that's a good point, because I was also taught the same thing, where if someone's in a position of authority, you don't question them. And that was pushed on me to an extent to which it was pushed on me to a ridiculous extent. And I think that probably Yeah, no, you made a good point in which that probably should not be, that shouldn't be pushed on a kid that much. Like, just
what?
because someone's in a position of authority.
You know that annoying game kids play where they just start saying why? We should teach them to do that for real. We should teach them the actual way to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Shannon says I'm talking about like the specific instance where they've stopped listening. They just wait for you to finish and then go, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
I coach a kid's soccer team. That's my life.
Literally does that. No, my little sister literally does that, and it gets to a point where it's like, I say, I don't know. And she goes, but why? I'm like, I don't know why. And she's like, but why?
Why don't you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. We should teach kids. We should teach kids the actual way to do that. And we should teach some adults to do that, because I've noticed that there are certain theists that I have argued with in the past that once you make them recognize how ridiculous it's either my belief or now we have to get into questions of solipsism, then they'll start doing in that case, I'm a skeptic now, and I'm just going to keep asking the question why to infinitum, but never be able to restate a single point you made. Yeah, I love that. Anyway, Lloyd, thank you for the very engaging conversation. Any final thoughts before we let you go? I won't hang up on you after 15 seconds like I did last week.
I mean, I have a lot to say, but I was just in general trying to challenge more strongly on the point that religion, as harmful as you think it is, it can actually be more harmful than a lot of people even realize. Yeah.
No doubt. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for calling.
We appreciate you, Lloyd.
You're welcome. I appreciate you.
Oh, I accidentally did hang
hung
up
on Lloyd.
I did.
Lloyd was being nice.
By the way, it was Rock Dog is what the caller earlier called me, and I had forgotten about this. Last week, I had this infuriating conversation with listen, I want to talk to theists. I do. I want them to call in, and I want to debate and argue and fight, but it's like in a real fight. You can't ignore being punched in the face by the other person and just pretend it didn't happen, because you just got punched in the face. And when I punch you in the face, I want you to acknowledge it. Brandon was not listening to a single point I made. He had a script, basically, he was going off of, and was just waiting for the next point. To the degree that he so much had this script that I literally said, I'm just going to grant your argument. I'm just going to let you have it. There's an intelligent designer. Now get me from there to Jesus Christ. And he literally was like, "Ooh, I didn't have that script prepared. So can we go back and still do the fight I was ready to do?" Like I granted him the argument, and then I had to ungrant it because
he wanted to fight you.
Anyway, we talked about the arbitrary nature of labeling and the names we use and stuff. And so Rock Dog, he was saying, well, you don't call a rock a dog and a dog a rock. And I was talking about the arbitrary nature of these sounds. They're not intrinsically dogs or rocks related to the language. Things could have been slightly different, and we would be calling dogs rocks and rock dogs as far as which sound we make. And so then anyway, it became, I'm Jimmy Rock Dog. Yeah. I'm Jimmy Rock Dog. We're going to head to California, and I have the name in here as Minch. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm getting echo.
This is Min.
Hey, can we come off of speakerphone though? Can we go just to the ear? We're getting ourselves echoing back in.
Oh, can you hear me now, or is it still echoing you?
We can hear you, Min, but the problem is we can also hear ourselves echoing back.
Yeah, but I'm on my headphone. I don't know. Is that the reason?
If we can move the mic away further or something. I've just embraced the fact that I am audio anal obsessive, and there are certain lines I can't cross, but I don't hear myself echoing now, so I think we're okay. So do you want to go ahead and give to us what your position is here?
Yeah, first, thank you for taking my call, and very nice to talk to you again, Shannon.
Hi, man.
So my, so my position is that religion is okay to teach to children if it falls into the category I would label as storytelling or mythologically based. And the one that I think is a bad idea is like theologically based religion.
So you teach them as though as mythology, so as like mythological stories, and teach them, as though they're fables. Is that what you're attempting to bring up? Like that there's, maybe moral imperatives that you can find imbued in this story, and things that'll make you think, and there's allegories to real life that you could analyze that are valuable to you. Like you can find archetypes, you can identify aspects of your own personality and the personality of others, and how people interact, like that sort of thing, like, but value as literature.
Yes, Shannon. Even if, let's say that the story that the parents believe to be literally correct, but I'm talking about like the value in the story that if teach to the children, then I think it's okay to teach to children. And to be honest, I am who I am nowadays, even though I don't practice, the Buddhism that I grew up with, because of that sort of teaching I grew up with.
Sure, I can understand that.
As long as it's clearly communicated what we're talking about here, let me actually say, let's do this. Let me say, anybody who has children in the room, maybe ask them to leave as I'm about to talk about Santa. Maybe mute the phone or something of that nature. I'm going to give you a few more seconds, and then I'm just going down this. So you're going to have to like rocket them out of the room. I have actually made it pretty publicly made my position on the concept of like teaching children about Santa, that I actually don't think we should teach children that Santa literally is real and then have to tell them one day that he's not. We shouldn't be going with the like, yeah, Santa's real, and to get your presents you have to do this and this and this. I think that sets them up poorly, and I think it is fine to have Santa, but do Santa like it is a myth, like it is a like, you can even tell them other people believe this. It's not your place to ruin other people's belief, but we'll do this tradition. So-and-so will dress up as Santa. We're playing this game and we're doing that. I don't think it's useful, and I don't think it teaches kids good critical thinking or skepticism skills. And I'd say the same thing. If you're talking about you want children to generally, like the previous caller, generally be academically aware of this, you can share with them that it is a myth and why it's a myth, because it would be another thing you don't want them to just take your word for. You still want them, if even to come to the conclusion of being a myth, you want them to come to that conclusion by honest means, not just because you said it. As long as that's what we're talking about here, I think we're on the same page. I probably wouldn't use Jonah and the whale as a story, even telling people this is a obviously fiction story. I probably wouldn't use it with my own kids. But I could see an atheist using a story like that, acknowledging that it's a story, and trying to get some kind of lesson from it. I think as long as that's fine, where we're at here, I think we're all on the same page.
I think the line for me is, like, if you're using it as a tool to have a child assess situations and, think about interactions and think about meaning, those are all valuable things. But the moment that it becomes an issue for me is if it's seen as a mandated prescriptive imperative for how that child is supposed to behave and think morally and approach the world, and they're told that they must adopt it, rather than going through the process of critically assessing why behaviors should be a certain way, why morals are a certain way, why their interactions should be, like, what their interactions should be governed by. Like, once you tell them that you have to behave this way because it's a mandate, or you have to think this way because it's a mandate, you're removing the opportunity for them to critically assess why they should act a way in the world and what they want to instantiate in the world and who they are in the world, because they have to mold their lives, their behaviors, and their thought processes around a scaffolding that's being imposed upon them, as opposed to them building their own scaffolding of reality and how to conduct themselves within it, based on asking the right questions and learning how to come to the right answers. Does that make sense, Min?
Yes, Shannon, and I generally agree with you. I'm just saying that it depends on the certain nature of religion. So if you look at Christianity, it's really, really theologically based faith, right? That usually I don't know. I mean, it's virtually impossible not to teach the doctrine of original sin to children, as if the parents see it as really the true religion. But if you look at religion like I know you are a good friend with the Ocean, you can ask him to confirm that he believes in the Norse tradition of his faith. And I don't, as far as I know, I don't remember him talking anything about theological teaching of the poetic Edda or the god Odin. It's essentially the connection with the gods of the Norse, and there are stories and myths to teach some lesson, and that's about it. There's nothing about theology in that I would consider like Christianity, or even like in my case the Buddhism that I grew up with. So I think it really depends on the type of religion.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting way. I think that's an interesting way to make the distinction and sort of go, this is where I think the line is. I think I would want to take a lot more time and thought to decide if that's where I also think the line of harm is introduced, or if it's introduced shy of that, or maybe even further in. I certainly think that there are probably for example, my friend Brenda, whose channel is God is Gray, she is a Christian, but even if she wouldn't say the same thing, I think that she is much more of a humanist in practice in day to day than she seems to be a practicing Christian. She's just had a child, and I don't think she's going to use her religion to sort of blackmail that child. And I could see a form of where I would go, do you need it? Do you need the Christianity, though, to get there? But where I won't ultimately feel like she's causing harm or abusing or something in that light, unless we're talking about, because also there's arguments to be had about what things are harm, and I think that it can be harmful to teach people to believe on faith, for example, and so then, but all harm is not created equally. So I think I see where your line is. I think I similarly think that that is a line that's probably a valid starting point, but I don't know if I'd put it down in the exact same space. I think in some instances I would come in shy, and in some instances I would go over the line. Because if we're just talking categorically about Buddhism or Hinduism or Nordic tradition or something, all of those are things that I can point to examples in the world that are extremely harmful. But then I can also point to examples like it sounds like yourself or my friend Ocean. And actually Ocean, as far as Nordic tradition goes, or Norse tradition rather, goes, will be the first one to point out people that are using that tradition to do extreme harm, because he is not a big fan of all of the white supremacists, for example, that try to borrow from that tradition. So certainly it seems to me that it can't be just as simple a line as which one's teaching based on mythology and which one's teaching versus on theology. However, I think it's a very interesting concept you've brought in here, and will cause me much pondering and much more thought.
Min does that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jimmy. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Min.
Welcome, Min. Always lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope we talk more.
Thank you. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
been great.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Those his lovely
That
things
was
to say.
awesome.
He's a very thought-provoking dude.
I feel like at some point people, it's as much as certain other phrases I've introduced and people have made a drinking game out of. I feel like the word nuance is going to become that on my channel too. But in all of these things,
nuance.
let's talk about the nuance. Let's introduce the nuance. Let's really take apart
Analyze the nuance.
the nuance.
Acknowledge the nuance.
Exactly. That could be the tagline of the channel. Let's analyze and let's anally analyze
well,
the
I'm
nuance.
sure let's say the line. Analyze the nuance.
Analyze the nuance.
Analyze the nuance.
Yes, that sounds great. All right, we will head to and we are at time for the show. We'll go a few minutes over, but I'm afraid we'll have to make both of these calls. We're gonna have to compress them. It's gonna be a little tough because it looks like they're both coming from some type of theist, or one person who's on the fence and the other person who's a theist. But we're gonna try and keep to schedule here, even though we're already going over. But let's start by talking to Natty in Ohio. Natty, should children be raised in religion?
That is a very complex question for me, Mr. Atheist.
Sure.
Nuance.
Well, the nuance. The nuance.
Nuance. So much nuance.
That nuance, though.
My mom and my dad were both progressive Catholics. But the problem, the big, huge problem is they did not really research the church that they or the school that they decided to enroll us in. And because they both worked multiple jobs to put food on the table, they were often lied to and kept out of the loop and uninformed. And me and my sister were severely, and I mean severely abused.
Oh, no. I'm so sorry.
To where like they would use not just brainwashing, emotional, mental, manipulative tactics. They would instill corporal punishments to control our behavior. And I don't know if my sister was ever sexually molested, but I know for a fact that I was, along with several other students. And this is really, really, really hard for me to talk about, because the crazy thing, and there's a silver lining in all of this, is that my parents, when they did have, time with us when we weren't at school, at home, they would teach us good morals and very uplifting beliefs that in turn they were far more progressive and universal and open. So my mother, she bless her, she had this mentality of that, God loves everyone no matter what, and I love you no matter what. And if you can't have faith in God, you have to have faith in humanity and yourself and your family. And that translated into this profound realm of digging for me when I was going through these traumas and struggling on my own. As I would research things, I would read things, and this is from the time I was 8 to the time I was 13 and beyond that I was going through this abuse. Beyond was when I researching it, obviously. Researching every religion, everything I could get my hands on about sexuality, science, history, the history of the Catholic Church and the foundation, just to understand more about, like, what am I getting myself into and how deep does this cult extend? And it led me down a scary, scary rabbit hole of confirmation that this has been going on for centuries. That they do this not just to like adults, but they do it to like children. And it they had me believing that because I was so rebellious, I would question things, and they couldn't instill that with me. I had what they called a demonic, rebellious spirit. They had me convinced that I was demonically being influenced and possessed, and I thought I was being attacked by demons at one point. They had me stopping, thinking that they were in the wrong. They were just teaching me, and craziness, like crazy, messed up stuff, dark stuff. And my mother, her beautiful way of teaching me love saved my life, because multiple times, because I started thinking and contemplating suicide when I was like 8 years old. What 8-year-old thinks they want to just end their life? And eventually, my parents, they caught wind that something isn't mentally right with me, and they got me help, and they got me out. They got me and my sister out of that school and that situation. And my sister, she had a different experience, but I know it was like to a lesser degree than mine, but she ended up getting knocked up at 16 because they did not give proper sexual education, obviously. But there's so much that having that positive faith from my parents helped in the radical faith that I was being instilled with. And so it was like kind of like a weird mix where, like, we talk about these nuances, but for me it's like I experienced both of them all at once. And so that's why I'm on the fence, because it's like, well, there's all these positive aspects and elements of it depending on how you go about it. And if you're constantly aware, you research the church and the school, you keep an eye, because it only takes a second to leave them unattended with somebody you think you trust, you think you can trust, and it shatters everything.
Yeah. So I want to restate that when we're talking about nuance, we're not saying that anywhere in that nuance is that what happened to you is acceptable, because very clearly what happened to you is unacceptable. And beyond religious upbringing and the type of harm that religious upbringing can do, you're talking about things that are systemically terrible, about a lot of lots of systemically terrible things all combining together to make something maximally abusive, and that we have things like this tendency for people who have an interest in being abusive to children in in multiple ways, and you laid out multiples of those ways, being drawn to certain types of careers and certain positions of power, and being able to make their way to that position of power, because when these people are being vetted, they're not being vetted for why they want to do it in regards to expanding the minds of children or whatever. You're talking about people who mostly the qualification they're looking for is a very strongly professed faith, and that's not enough. In fact, quite the opposite. It doesn't tell you at all whether or not a person is going to be abusive to children in that way. And so, again, we're not saying within the nuance of, is it especially practical to think that we can simply just say religion and upbringing your child in religion is so obviously negative, we as a society should ban it, whether that's culturally or literally legally. We're saying that, as Shannon was talking about, like it's not practical to think that the parents are going to hold a religious belief and they're going to completely, the child will be completely absent of attendance, and that certainly not all religious beliefs, just by being religious beliefs, are going to take you down. Like we were talking about our friend Ocean, there's no version of his religious beliefs as he, not to say no version isn't other people's, but the way that he exercises them that would put children in harm's way at all, because putting children in harm's way is entirely antithetical to his beliefs, at least as I understand them.
Oh, that's the thing, and that's a great point, and I want to elaborate more and expand on that point and say that no, I don't think it should be banned, but I think there should definitely be some regulatory measures put in place. I mean, we need to be doing more background checks, especially when it comes to priests and people who are in those positions, and they're supposed to be teaching and taking care of children. We want to make sure that what they are doing is taking care of children and teaching them faith in a way that is healthy, and the way that my parents supplemented and led me in a way to be able to combat that negative and fight through it. So, I mean, there's positive faith, and then, of course, we know that there's toxic, negative people of faith. There are good people and bad people, no matter what you believe. Yeah. And we have to screen these people better, especially people in positions of authority that are teaching children.
And shouldn't be left alone with it. There's not really ever a good reason for an individual adult at a school, especially in that you're not talking about somebody vetted by the family or something, to be alone with a single child. There's not really ever a good reason for that. And there's more things that I feel like, again, lead to where you can expect the abuse. Because when you're talking about a Catholic school, you're talking about teachers being mainly nuns and priests and having to be celibate. Yeah. And I think that for celibacy, it's hard because we don't know to what proportion does forced celibacy produce people who seem to be eager to abuse in the way we've described versus are people which one came first? Do abusive people seek out those positions, or do those positions and the requirements turn people abusive? And unfortunately, we don't know the proportions there. But yeah,
and that's a really interesting question because I don't know what his background was, like whether he was abused or what, I don't know.
And there's a lot in a story like yours, which is so heartbreaking. There's a lot of failures, and it can't simply, unfortunately, be summarized as religious upbringing. Even despite the fact that obviously that is interwoven so much. At a certain point, we have to address the human aspects of them all, as well as failings in a lot of other places. I see Shannon, every time I see Shannon writing notes, I know that means she's going to want to. I think you're writing notes.
Right.
Shannon, go ahead.
Let Shannon talk, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm sorry, but also that it sounds like your mother was a conduit for presenting good values to you, and she utilized her faith as a mode of transmission, and that must have been an interesting juxtaposition for you. Well, not interesting, that's a poor choice of words, I'm sorry. That must have been a difficult juxtaposition for you, especially when on the other side of the coin you're being presented with somebody who was not a conduit for the good aspects that you can find within the religion, but was utilizing that power structure and trust dynamic to exploit and abuse you. So I'm very, very sorry, but it sounds to me as though you had or have a wonderful mother and support system, and I'm very incredibly glad of that for you. So
I'm very lucky.
And I appreciate
her, yeah.
And I know it must have been difficult, so I'd like to thank you for taking the opportunity to do it. Other people may glean value from it and garner value from it. So I appreciate your strength in doing that.
I want to add something to what you just said there because, it made me feel very conflicted, but at the same time, it gave me examples to, like, even as a child, to automatically notice the difference between right and wrong, and like I innately knew the difference and could see like this is the difference between somebody who is a good person of faith versus an evil person who abuses that privilege. And so it was a very hard life lesson, but I'm glad that I learned it, and I'm very grateful that I have sane parents who helped guide me through it. So there's definitely hope within it. Absolutely.
Cool.
Would you guys like to add anything else?
No, thank you for sharing your experience. I know that obviously it was a big deal because of everything that you went through. So yeah, thank you for the conversation and sharing and listening as well.
Yes,
thank you so much. And I share your videos on Twitter and on Facebook and on my playlists on my channel because it's like I want to get you out there because I love you guys.
I appreciate that very much.
I love what you do.
Thank you very much.
Alrighty.
Bye, Natty.
Bye-bye.
All right. Might need to take a second to breathe. Pretty heavy call. I'm a person who just internalized stuff too much. I do want to say on some of the live chats, first of all, if you're watching over on Mr. Atheist, you should be watching this over on the line anyway. But people, use your head before chatting something. Just use your head. Certain things are going to get you instantly banned. I know even things you might think are a compliment. I'm not gonna say the things you might think are a compliment. Keep them to yourself. Like seriously, it's 2020. You know what things are over the line by now. Let's be real.
I'm
all right.
Confused. I'm intensely confused. But okay.
I'll tell you after. All right.
Just looked at my
we
chat.
Are going. No, it was on the Mr. Atheist chat. We are in Georgia talking to Indigo Rose. Indigo, what do you think? Should children be raised religious?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think so. So far, so good.
Is the audio all right for you, Jimmy?
Yes, thank you. I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did want to clarify. I believe I was the one you were referencing as being some sort of theist, and for keyword of the night of nuance, I consider myself an agnostic polytheistic Jew.
Okay.
And just for a little clarification on that, in the Ten Commandments, when it says, thou shalt have no other gods before me, to me that indicates a moment where God is conceding that there are other gods. So to me, if there are any gods, yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say, contextually, actually, as far as the original scriptures go, and this is something people argue about, but certainly the side I come down on is that was actually the intent of the original people writing the book, that Elohim or Yahweh or whichever one you want to go with, that he was a god amongst a sea of gods, and that he was meant to be. So while I similarly think that was the intent of the authors, I don't believe in that the Bible is true, nor do I find the Ten Commandments to be all that deep either. But I do agree with the premise that it establishes whoever the author was believed there were multiple gods.
Yes, absolutely true. And to be clear, my practice as an agnostic, polytheistic Jew does not hinge at all on belief in any of those things. I do not believe that I don't believe that the Bible or the Torah, the Tanakh, I don't believe that any of that is like 100% verified and authority to anything. I base my practice as a polytheist and a Jew off of things that make me feel connected to my heritage and my culture, and things that bring me, that
you would get benefit from without religion, but I do like the structure that causes me to do those things, like honoring Shabbat, like forces me to take a day off from everything else and focus on myself. Honoring the Sabbats, the pagan holidays throughout the year, is a good way for me to keep track of time, changes of season, and all of that. None of it is hinging on belief, but I did want to give a little nuance on that. Technically, I am agnostic, if not atheist. I am, like, in practice, Jewish and polytheistic. If that makes sense. But that's not necessarily what I'm here to talk about.
To some degree, I think that we all do some of those things too. So, for example, like, while I don't keep the Sabbath day holy, there's a difference about Sunday in our culture and our society, and there's less to do, less things are happening, more places are closed, and there's just a different attitude about what Sunday is for. And there's even this little sort of parentheses of day of rest, and I think that I still have I still treat Sunday like the beginning or the end, depending on who you are, of a new week, and taking that time to reset. So I think we culturally sort of internalize some of those things, but certainly I won't be saying that means I'm an agnostic, atheist, Christian, or anything like that.
Okay, so first, I want to discuss how even being raised in mainstream or non-denominational religions, like what people would consider maybe not fundamentalist, but not progressive, like that middle ground. I see a lot of people in your comments on your channel or in the live chats, and like especially when you're in Caleb and Sophia videos, when talking about how heavily children are indoctrinated, I see people being like, "Oh, but that's not in mainstream Christianity. That's not non-denominational Protestant." And like I know when talking about the Bible model, there's a and like when talking about like scoring things on a bite model, there's the nuance between something being structural in the religion and being cultural. And like all of that emotional control or information control, thought control, it's all culturally in the religion. So like for context on myself, I was adopted by non-denominational Protestant family members when I was 5. I grew up in Calvary Chapel. I grew up being like heavily influenced by Billy Graham, Chuck Smith, Kent Hovind. I lived in Colorado Springs for a while and spent a lot of time at the Focus on the Family headquarters. Grew up listening to all the Christian kid radio stations. Like that was everything that I was surrounded by in that family. Growing up like as an adopted child, I had a lot of trauma that they thought they could fix with God. That there was like minimal therapy when I was very young, and I returned to therapy again when I was a teenager. But I had a few points I wanted to address of, first of all, like the information control. Oh, sorry. Backtrack. I'm a little flustered.
Okay.
I wanted to give a definition, because we've been talking about the nuance of what is raising a kid in religion. Here I'm defining raising a kid in religion as raising a kid primarily exposed to a singular or maybe a couple of similar religions or denominations, with the expectation that they'll believe it, conform their morality and identity to it, and raising a child with exposure to religion would be like not bringing them to church every week, not raising them in that community, because like you've had previous callers discussing how sometimes it's coming from the parents, sometimes it's coming from the church, oftentimes it's coming from both, but in all churches, really, it's all coming from the churches, whether the parents are pushing it or not. Raising a child with exposure to religion would be giving them the information available on what people believe, why they believe it, all that nuance when it's age appropriate and they can have these conversations. Because in order to raise a child in religion, like people will always be like, oh, like I give my child all the information, we talk about it afterwards, whatever. But if you want to raise a child in religion, there is going to be a sense of that information control in one way or another. You either have to control the access to the information or how the information is processed. So for me, it was always phrased to me as, this is something that you can believe if you want to, like at the beginning, right? And it was always, we don't want you to just believe this blindly. We want you to know why you believe it. But then they would tell me why I believed it. And it was in the most subtle ways. And I was always that kid that questioned everything. Like, why is Eve responsible for all of the sin of the world? Sorry?
Indigo. Yeah, sorry. We're 25 minutes over time here, so and I don't mean to be rude, but
I do understand, and I will be wrapping.
Let's just not go down any of those. Let's not go down those side roads. Yeah, if you can sort of bring it all to a singular point here.
I actually do have a bullet point outline, and I actually am not going down side roads, and am very much getting to the point.
Okay. Well, let's get there.
Okay, so it was always like you have the option to believe this, but there was the subtle manipulation. And then when I really started to question it fed into this cycle that manifested psychiatric problems that weren't there and became dominant over the trauma that needed to be addressed. So anytime, I know Mr. Atheist, you've talked before about that cycle of validation where you're doing what they want you to do, so everything is good and everything's happy. And then if you're not doing what they want you to do, your whole life is ruined, everyone's against you. That cycle combined with periodic depression that I would have that correlated with periods of trauma, like traumatic experiences I'd had in the past, being like depressed at those periods in the year, that got misinterpreted as bipolar disorder because they kept putting me through that cycle. It got misinterpreted as bipolar disorder. I was lashing out. They full on tried to exorcise me. And this is in mainstream religion, non-denominational Protestantism. Like, it's dangerous everywhere. And it's all supported by the church. Ultimately, when none of that worked on me, none of it got through to me, I still didn't believe, still wasn't straight, still wasn't cis, none of that. When none of that worked, they kicked me out, and the church told them to. The church backed them up. The church took me out of any positions of volunteering I was in these non-denominational, non-cult churches. And we can't be raising kids in that.
I'd agree. That's a horribly damaging environment to raise a child within. I'd agree.
Yep. I think...
And like I wasn't even like it got real quick, like it got so bad to the point where I wasn't even allowed my own private thoughts. I couldn't keep a private journal, and if I wanted a private journal, my youth pastor's wife had to read it twice a week and write little notes back to me about how I like should deal with my problems.
Yeah, it's behavioral and thought control. That's all you're describing as seriously abusive environments. So I think a lot of throughout the evening, that something that I've noticed as people call in is that there are a lot of people, yourself included, who have suffered a great degree of trauma as a child due to a religious upbringing. You can directly trace it back to being brought up in a religion and point to that harm, and all of that is incredibly valid and horrible and horrifying, and everything that I try to stand up against, but I think what people might be hearing when we say that there's nuance is that nuance also blankets over your specific situation. And I just want to make sure that it's something that you recognize when I say this, that when we say there's nuance, we don't say that nuance applies to you here.
Oh, no, definitely.
There are potentially instances where somebody's not been in your circumstances, that nuance may apply there. So when there are 100%, 110 million thousand %, many demonstrable instances where raising a child in an indoctrinated setting, regardless of, whether or not it's a cult type environment or not, or recognized as a cult type environment, or recognized as, mainstream and acceptable, is going to cause damage because of the indoctrination, because of the social setting, because of the power structures, because of the way that it creates schematic structures for how to perceive the world, because of all of the perceptions that we have against reward and punishment, but possibilities for shunning and expectations that are set by people who have authority over us, who we want to please. All of those things are damaging in and of themselves. And then when there's a confluence of them due to these types of structures existing and being reinforced and presented as virtuous, that's damaging. That's a recipe for disaster that we throw children into without even thinking about, because just being religious is presented as a virtue without question. Even us questioning it now.
Exactly.
People. Right.
Well, and then the overshadowing damage that was done is, I keep hearing people talk about, like, well, that there are these good things that you can get out of religion. Like, yes, the good things that I have found for myself about certain practices that I enjoy. But when you're trying to teach these good things to a child using religion, and then they push against the religion and you push back, like for me, it hit a point where it was me and my mental health against my parents and religion, to the point where they didn't get to teach me any useful skills because they wasted so much time trying to make me believe instead of teaching me anything. And then they kicked me out into the world at 18, like, here you go, have fun living life when you have no idea what you're doing.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, no one should have a belief system imposed upon them, a fear of their own peril and losing everything that's valuable to them ever. It's abuse.
So if you're going to raise children with exposure to religion, you should.
Sorry, Jimmy froze for a second, so I don't even think you realized that he was talking. Yeah, you did momentarily. You're back now, though. We can hear you.
I think while acknowledging the nuance and advocating for going down that road and discovering what the nuance is, I don't think that we have any disagreements here on where. Again, it isn't just that we're saying there's a nuance no, or rather that there's a nuance yes. We're also saying there'd be nuance to the no position too. So it's literally from all ends here. So we're totally on board with religious upbringing causes harm in these scenarios, and I think in everything you've presented here as plausibly harmful, that we completely agree on. So just want to sort of once again say that's not what we mean by the nuance.
And I think that you can raise kids with them knowing, I personally practice this because I get this benefit from it, but you can get these benefits without religion or in other religions, and like presenting them with all the opportunities to learn from an educational mindset or from a seeking mindset of whatever they want. But it shouldn't be a battle. It shouldn't be a position where they feel like they have to, or everything will fall apart, or even in best case scenario, relationships will be strained, or they'll feel a sense of disapproval. Like, if you're raising kids with that mindset, you're raising kids selfishly, and it's not right.
I think the thing that we have to advocate for first, because obviously the most ideal situation would be if we could have this conversation in good faith and we could be having these conversations with everybody the best solution there that's not going to happen is that people would put down their faith. They'd put down their religion if it is not something adequately if it's not adequately demonstrated to be a good belief to have. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So the things we have to advocate before that, and the nuance we have to explore the most, is how do we encourage a society with I just invented this phrase where we elevate the discourse. I just came up with that.
Miserable human. That's my tagline, in case you're wondering. Indigo Rose. Jimmy's a horrible person. And yeah, you froze. God froze you.
I froze again. But where we're having these conversations en masse as much as possible, where regardless of if a child is being raised in a religion or not, we're equipping everybody and making the best case for healthy ways to raise children. And they would be many of the things we talked about as good things tonight, and certainly we would not include those things that were so horrible, where we're going to be living in this world where the religion's not just going to go away no matter how right we feel or how much we feel like it should. So what is the way between that and what's realistic? What is the way that we can advocate for a better society and better child raising? With that, Indigo, I'm going to let you give your final thoughts here, and then we're going to head out.
Can I say one last thing?
Yep, that's what I was saying.
Can I say one last
Go ahead.
thing?
Mm-hmm.
I want to say thank you to you, because I found your channel a couple of years ago, and at that point I was pretty well out of the mindset that I was raised in, but very much feeling the struggle of like having been disconnected from the family that kicked me out like a few years before. And so like watching your videos just really helped. It helped and still helps to like reinforce in my mind why I left and why I don't subscribe to that ideology and why it was so toxic. In fact, like since watching your channel, I've only identified more ways in which it was harmful to me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be a part of your journey, and I'm glad that anybody finds anything I do remotely useful. So I very much appreciate that.
All right. Thank you for your time. I literally called like 100 times trying to get through.
Oh,
Dedication.
I'm glad you made it.
That's what's up.
Serious dedication.
Thank you, Indigo. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks so
Have a
much.
good night, guys. Thank you very much.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye.
People in the live chat on my channel asking if Snow is my real last name. So now's the time to let everyone know. I'm actually Tom Hanks' son, obviously. Look at me. My name is Jimmy Hanks, and I have inherited, obviously, all of his talent. All right. What? Why are you laughing? Why is that funny?
Unrelated. Completely unrelated. It had nothing to do with what you said. Somebody just said something funny on my live. That must have... It was everything you said made total sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, so much for watching. Thanks for hanging out on the line. Next week, I forgot who's on. I think it's Dragnaut. Is Dragnaut? Do you know who's on next week?
Oh my God! Yeah,
Is it Dragnaut? It's
You're a mess. You need a calendar. God damn.
Next week will be Dragnaut, and that's going to be a fun one because he has a lot of people who follow him and are definitely going to call in. My thanks to Shannon Q. Make sure that you check out Shannon Q's channel if you would like to see somebody. If you
froze again.
Competence, and that's the show. This was the show. Man, this is a terrible tagline. That's not how I should say. You know what?
That's your tagline. This is the show.
I'm going to sign off with. You're right. I'll sign off with that original thing I came up with during the show. Remember, elevate the discourse. Play the closing music.